I'm Fred Gunn, and I'm from Provo, Utah.
And you are what were you in the 475th? Were you a pilot? Or?
I was a pilot in the 475th, in the 433rd Squadron.
Okay. Okay, what we're going to do, we have about, probably about, I'm going to sit down here so you can just kind of at this level. Okay. We have about 10 questions we're going to ask you.
Okay.
And feel free to elaborate as much as you want.
Okay.
And at times you'll see me look at this monitor, and you'll see me, look at some other things. Okay. So don't let that bother you too much. All right. So when did you join the 475th?
I joined the 475th in January of 1945. We were at Mindoro at the time.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 19 years old.
So, let's see, you're 19 years old and you're in charge of about of course back then they weren't $1 million aircraft as they are.
I think it was about $200,000 aircraft, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So now you had just completed flight training. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you did just before you joined the group and then joining the group?
I went to flight training. After I graduated from Williamsfield, I went over to Victorville and flew P-39s for a short time. Then we went to Santa Maria, California, and flew P-38s. That's where I got my P-38 training. And we were there for 6 months, and then we were shipped overseas.
And how many sorties did you actually fly?
I think I flew 63 sorties.
And during that time, they were in the Philippines, correct?
In the Philippines primarily. Some were over to the China coast, and some over Formosa.
You guys flew some really long missions.
Yes, some of them were 8 or 9 hour missions. Hard on the back.
And I would think the kidneys, but let's see. So tell me, what did you think of the P-38?
I loved the P-38. I actually enlisted in the Army Air Corps to fly the P-38. And I don't know why, but I had seen a picture of it, and I thought, that's what I want to fly. And everywhere I went in my training, I told them I wanted to fly the P-38. And so eventually they chose me to go to a short-term basic training and then go directly to advance to fly the 322, which was the early model of the P-38. And it never worked out quite that way because I think that they did away with that program, and I went through the actual basic and advanced training in the T6.
What did you really like about the aircraft?
I liked the stability. I liked the 2 engines. And I liked the maneuverability. But over all that water, I really loved those 2 engines. And there were occasions when they came in handy.
What did you think of the ground crews who worked on your aircraft?
I had a crew chief that I figured was one of the better mechanics and ground crewmen that we had over there. I can't recall his name, unfortunately, but he was very good. The airplane was always in tip-top shape.
That was kind of tough too, because I mean they didn't have all the tools, all the equipment.
Well, and the climate was not conducive to keeping everything in good shape either, but they did a fine job.
If I had to ask you, you probably had a couple of different commanders during your career there. If I ask you which commander you felt really did a good job or really liked working for, who would that be?
I liked John Loisel. I really liked him, and I still like him. We're good friends to this day, but I figured that he was the best one. I have to remember that I wasn't acquainted with McDonald for, except for about maybe 4 months. And then he went home and John took over. But I really liked him. And as a squadron commander, I liked Bill Hanning. I thought he was very good.
You know, like I said, I was in a very simple war and a very nice war. You guys were in a very long war and a very prolonged war and everything else. And there are always good days and there's bad days in wars. Tell me what you thought was one of your worst days that you ever had.
I think one of the worst days we had was a ground mission. We were called out of Lingayen to strike a Japanese bunch that had settled into a cemetery out in the Cagayan Valley. And we got over there and made the bombing run, and the weather had closed in to where we couldn't get back to Lingayen. And so Glenn Maxwell was the flight leader, and he flew south down the valley to where we could find an open spot, and we climbed up to 35,000 feet and then started back across the mountains to Clark Air Force Base area. And we ran into a hole that we could see the ground. And so we cut the power and lowered the speed brakes and just pointed the nose right down that hole. And I remember my speed. At one time I was checking it, it was 540 miles an hour. But we were going straight down, just curling in that little hole. We pulled out about 1,500 feet above the ground. And we were in touch with the ground control, I think his name was Bunny or something like that. And he gave us a heading down to Clark. And when we landed at Clark, 3 out of the 4 of us ran out of fuel on the ground. It was that close. And that was one of the worst, worst days that I can remember.
I would imagine that was.
On that particular day, we took off with, I think, 8 or 12 airplanes, and only 4 of us made it back to Clark. One of the pilots, the turbo superchargers didn't work too well on some of the airplanes, and he couldn't maintain the altitude, and so he dropped down into the clouds, and he ended up over the Atlantic Ocean, or the Pacific Ocean, east of Luzon, running out of fuel, and he had to bail out. His name was Bush. His legs hit the horizontal stabilizer back there, broke both legs, went into the water and was picked up by a Navy ship that he could see down there, and they had to amputate both legs, and he passed away from shock. And another friend of mine went the other direction, out over the East China Sea, and he was saved by the Navy. They had him on radar, and they said, if you're lost, turn south down to such and such a point, turn back in, and there'll be a hole there, and you can let down to the beach, and then come up the beach to Subic Naval Station. And that's what he did, and so he was saved. But we were scattered all over the island of Luzon that day. We spent the night at Clark. Someone stole my parachute out of the airplane, and I asked them to loan me one to get me back to Clark or to Lingayen the next day, and they refused. So I flew my P-38 back to Lingayen without a parachute. Wasn't very happy about it.
Thank you very much, folks. Yeah.
Yeah, steal my chute, then won't help me out.
So let's go to the converse side. What do you consider to be your best day?
Well, we were up over Formosa. Glenn Maxwell and I had made a little fighter sweep up over Formosa, a 2-man fighter sweep, if you can imagine that. And we ran across the train, shot at it somewhat, went further north up around Taipei, and turned around and started back. And we saw these 2 airplanes that looked like Tonys out in front of us. And Glenn said, you take number 2 and I'll take number 1. And we separated out, got our guns on and everything, and we just pulled up in range and just ready to fire, and they made a turn. It was two P-51s. So naturally turned off our gun switches. And we were flying L models, and they had a little radar system that covered 60-degree angle out of the rear of the plane. And all of a sudden, these radar, this radar signal sounded in our ears, and it was the first time we'd ever heard it. And it scared us so bad we both almost bailed out. But that was a fun trip. We had a lot of fun on that one.
Did the P-51 pilots know you were coming after them?
No, we didn't tell them either.
During wartime, it's not fun, and I know that, but there are times that funny things take place. What, other than this last story you told me, is there something funny that you really remember?
Yeah, when we landed at Clark Air Force Base the first day, they had assigned our tent area under some big trees alongside of a road and just off the west end of the runway. And there was a grader that was smoothing the ground out. And we thought he was just being nice to us, making it so we wouldn't have to do it ourselves. And so we were standing there thinking, well, let's see, I'll dig my foxhole here, put my tent over here. And he heard us. And he said, if I were you, I wouldn't dig too deep right here. He said, I just got through burying 75 Japanese bodies down a hole there. So we put our tent there and our foxhole over there. And just stuff like that happened all the time.
Now, what did you do after the war? Did you stay in the Air Force?
I got out and I went to Brigham Young University and got my master's degree. And then Korea came along and I went back in. And I stayed in for a total of 33 years and made a career out of it.
Throughout that time period, what did you were a pilot the whole time, and what kind of planes did you
Yes,
fly?
I was flying. I started out when they requalified me. They requalified me in a C-47, and from there I went to F-89s, and I flew the T-33, which is a trainer version of the F-80, and then I was in Air Training Command, and I started up the T-38 Supersonic Trainer program at Moody Air Force Base, and flew that airplane. And that was a fun airplane to fly. It had climbed 32,000 feet a minute, where in a P-38 would struggle for a half hour to get to 35,000 feet. This thing making a minute and a half, climbing at almost Mach 1. And if you lowered the nose 2 degrees, it would go Mach 1, climbing 32,000 feet a minute. It was a fun airplane to fly. And then when I went to Vietnam, I flew the F-105 out of Tok Lee, Thailand. My main assignment was at 7th Air Force Headquarters at Ton Sanut. I was in charge of the Fighter Division of Combat Operations and conducting the out-country war, which was Laos and Vietnam, or North Vietnam. So that was what I did over there.
And what rank did you retire at?
I retired as a lieutenant colonel.
Yeah, 33 years.
Yeah, I was a little bit older than my the other guys around me because I'd been out, for that period of time getting my education, and but I was satisfied with it. It was a lot of fun and good career.
You're a great career, yeah. I retired lieutenant colonel too, so. Yeah,
Did you?
Yeah. So, what the transition? I mean, you started out with prop planes, ended up with supersonic jets. How was that transition?
The until you get to the supersonic bent wing, I call them, the swept wing airplanes, there's not much difference, just in the power. Like in the the F-80 flew just like a P-38 because it's a straight wing, and the only thing is you have to anticipate the need for power a little bit quicker. Now, when you get to an airplane like the T-38, the supersonic airplane, it's altogether different. It'll drop out from under you. You don't flare it out to land. It just drops. You take up a position with a power setting and fly it to the ground. So it's different. It's different. But again, I can get 6 inches off the ground, flared out for landing with the T-38, go to afterburner, and it'll never touch the runway. It's got so much power. But it's different flying altogether.
Of course, I was in the Army, and all I wanted to do was one time in my life fly in a jet aircraft. and I have never done it yet, and I don't think I'll ever get to.
I was the air liaison officer at Fort Knox when I came back from Vietnam, and they had me check out. I flew with the Kentucky Guard in their F-101 or F-101s, but they also, Army wanted me to check out in their, it was actually an overpowered 182, and I hated every minute of it. And it'd take me forever to go up to Wright-Patterson, where I'd been used to getting there in about 10 minutes. It took me 3 hours in this thing. And if the weather was bad, they didn't want you to go, but I went anyway. And one day, they said, I went up there, and the weather was bad. And so I just called approach control and asked for instrument flight rule clearance and a GCA ground control approach to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which it did. And I broke out at about 100 feet out of the rain and the haze, you know, and about 1/8 of a mile visibility. But in that airplane, 1/8 of a mile is forever. And landed and did what I had to do up there and took off and went back. And they said, "How did you get into Wright-Patterson?" I said, on instruments. They said, "That airplane is not cleared for instruments." And I said, "It is now."
That reminds me of that old thing in, what airport was it? Yeah, where the guy said, you know, it's a damn good thing the 707 never read the book.
Yeah,
right. That was great. Okay. So in 45, let's see, McGuire was gone already?
He had been killed 2 months before. Mm-hmm.
And Lindbergh had already come and gone.
Lindbergh had come and gone. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
McDonald was still there. All the old guys were still there, and I knew most of them. But they left right after Clark, or right after Lynn Guyan, perhaps. I can't recall exactly.
So did you see time in Korea too, or did you?
Yes, and Vietnam. But I want to tell you about one mission that we flew up over Formosa. The first pass I made, dive bombing, my bombs didn't come off. And so I pulled back up and told whoever was leading us that I was going to make another pass. And he said, okay, pull the manual handle. And I did, and the bombs came off. But as I rolled out and looked down, here was this ball of fire coming out of the palm trees, and it came to me and just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger till it looks like it was going to hit me right between the eyes. Well, it went right by me between the engine nacelle and the gun compartment and hit an airplane 5,000 feet higher up. And hit him in the gun compartment through both of the doors, back over the canopy, and it also hit an engine enough to spray oil all over his canopy. So here he was on instruments, having to feather up an engine and fly 350 miles back to the Philippines. And he did it. But he was an old, experienced pilot. If it had been a guy like me, the first thing I would have done is spun in.
Do you remember who that was?
His name was, we called him Pappy Stewart. I've never seen him since. And I don't think he's ever been to any of the reunions. But he came in very late. He came in probably just a couple of months before the war was over, and he flew that mission, and then I know he's up in Korea. But I think he'd been an instructor back in the States primarily, so he knew what he was doing in airplanes. But he was older. He was 26, 27. We called him Pappy.
Amazing. But the last question I have for you, and then I'll let you add anything else you want to
Okay.
add. Okay. Some years ago, Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation.
Mm-hmm.
You are part of that
Yeah.
Greatest Generation. And for Ken and I, as I said a little earlier, we really feel great about you guys, because if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be around and wouldn't be able to do the things that we're doing. And I mean, you guys went through a depression, you went through probably the worst war of all time. You came back, you rebuilt the country, you did everything else. So I mean, we really feel that you guys are the greatest generation. When you hear that, how do you feel about that?
You know, I get really embarrassed when I hear it. And I get embarrassed when people come up and they know that I've served in the military and say, thank you for all you've done. It embarrasses me. I don't know why, but it does. I don't think we're owed any thanks. Respect, maybe. I didn't appreciate the disrespect we got when we came back from Vietnam. But I just want to be treated normal.
Great answer. Yeah. So, anything you like to add?
Yeah, I have more respect for the guys that you, like you, that did what you did over in Desert Storm and what they're doing over there now. It really tears me apart what the politicians are doing to the guys that are fighting over there. I was over in Vietnam when Jane Fonda and that bunch were doing their thing, and I saw the effect that it had on the North Vietnamese and how much stronger they became because of her activity. And they're doing the same thing to our guys over there now. And I feel real bad about that, and I wish there was something I could do about it, but I don't know what it could be.
Yeah, and we agree with you pretty much on that, and it really bothers me. I was lucky a couple of weeks ago. I was flying. I had to go to Honolulu for a meeting and flying back to Maui where I live, and some troops who had just come back from Iraq were on the airplane with me, and they happened to be, the guy who was sitting next to me was an Army medic, and I was a medical service corps officer, and I was executive officer for combat support hospitals. So I also was trained as a medic, so I knew these guys fairly well. Once he found out that I was retired and home shot, he really started to open. I said, tell me the truth, what's it really like? He said, sir, we are really helping over there.
Yeah.
He said, don't believe all this shit
Yeah.
that you're reading about in the newspaper. He said,
Absolutely.
We're doing some good over there.
The day before I came down here, my sons own a retail knife store in Orem, Utah. And one of my granddaughters married this young man who had a brother that just came back from Iraq minus both legs. Got caught in a roadside bomb trying to take care of that. And I asked him, I said, Kyle, what do you think about the war over there now? He said, I feel just the same now without my legs as I did about it when I had my legs. We're doing so much good over there. And those people appreciate it in spite of what our politicians are telling us and the media is telling us.
And I also found that when I get down on kids because I don't see them doing some good things, think about our troops over there who are doing good things.
Yeah.
And I'm not worried about this country too much.
I'm not either, not either. You can see the bad ones, and they get the big play. You never hear about the good ones. The media, it doesn't sell papers.